Welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive mountain farmer returns home, he finds more than broken fences. He finds war. A powerful HOA claims his land, backed by forged documents, fake laws, and armed patrols. But they picked the wrong man to push. This isn't just a property dispute, it's a siege. I had barely been back 3 days when the mountain started testing my patience again. Only this time, it wasn't a broken fence or a jammed water pump. It was people. The kind who come with clipboards, matching vests, and the kind of smiles you only see on TV evangelists. I'd spent the morning clearing out the irrigation trench, getting ready for spring seeding, when I heard the low crunch of tires on gravel. 2 black SUVs wound up my forest road like they were on a mission. They stopped right at my front gate, dust rising behind them in the thin mountain air. The logo on the doors read, Average Peaks HOA. I leaned on my shovel and muttered, well, hell, here we go. 4 people climbed out, 3 men in reflective vests, and 1 woman who moved like she'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror. Mid-50s, blonde bob stiff in the wind, clipboard already out before she shut her door. She gave the kind of tight smile you use on someone you think you own. Good morning, she called. I'm Karen Lawrence, president of the Average Peaks Homeowners Association. We're here for your compliance inspection. Compliance inspection, I repeated, half laughing. You've got the wrong property, ma'am. This isn't part of your association. She clicked her pen, ignoring my tone. Actually, it is. Effective immediately. Your farm has been incorporated into Average Peaks under the administrative realignment approved last week. Congratulations, Mr. Emerson. You're part of our community now. I couldn't tell if she was joking. My place sat a good mile uphill from their fancy cabins, separated by national forest and a rocky ridge. That's cute, I said, but this land's been private since the 1920s. You might want to check your maps again. Karen's smile didn't move. According to our updated zoning plan, your property falls within our boundaries. And unfortunately, sir, you're in violation of several community standards: unregistered livestock, unapproved structures, and excessive perimeter fencing. If you don't sign the membership contract within 2 hours, we'll have to initiate administrative eviction proceedings. She said it like she was reading a lunch menu. One of her men started snapping photos of my barn. Another lifted a measuring tape along my fence post. I took a step forward, voice calm, but hard. You're trespassing on private property. Take your people and your nonsense back down the mountain. Karen gave a little sigh, as if dealing with a slow student. We're authorized under HOA Mandate Section 9.3. You'll find the notice explains everything. She pulled a crisp envelope from her clipboard and offered it through the gate. I didn't take it. She set it on the ground, neat as a grave marker. 2 hours, she said, glancing at her watch. After that, we'll proceed with administrative measures. I suggest you cooperate. It'll be easier for everyone. They walked back to their SUVs like a parade of bureaucracy and arrogance. Engines started, gravel sprayed, and the mountain was quiet again. I stood there for a long moment, watching the dust drift through the pines, wondering if I'd just hallucinated the whole thing. Then I picked up the envelope. Inside was a formal notice, complete with seals, barcodes, and a signature from something called HOA Legal Division. It cited a boundary correction filed under county code, and a line in bold that read, Failure to comply within 2 hours will result in immediate administrative evacuation procedures. Administrative evacuation. I actually laughed out loud. It sounded like something out of a dystopian movie. Still, the document looked official, too official. The county stamp, the map, the jargon. For a brief moment, I felt the old professional itch, the one from my years handling disaster zones, the sense that something big and stupid was about to happen. I went inside, poured myself a mug of coffee, and stared out the window at the empty road. The pines swayed gently, pretending nothing had happened. My dog, Jasper, trotted up to the gate and sniffed the envelope like it smelled wrong. Which it did. I muttered, Guess we're dealing with a new kind of storm, buddy. Then I folded the papers, slipped them into a folder, and started the truck. If they thought they could annex my mountain, they were about to get educated in private property law. The drive down the mountain took a little over 40 minutes, 30 if I ignored the washboard ruts and didn't mind my suspension screaming. I had the so-called notice in the glove compartment and a grim kind of energy in my gut. It wasn't just arrogance on a clipboard anymore. Something about the documents looked too polished, too precise. It had the fingerprints of people who knew how to make lies look institutional. I parked outside the county land management office, a squat brick building with sun-faded blinds and that faint whiff of toner and bureaucracy. Inside, I walked up to the front desk and asked for any zoning updates filed on parcel-CR487A, my farm. The young man behind the desk blinked at me through his thick glasses, typed something, frowned, then stood up and walked into a back office without a word. A few minutes later, he returned with a folder and a woman in a navy blazer who introduced herself as Tina Sandoval, assistant director. She was polite but cautious, like she already regretted whatever was in that folder. "Mr. Emerson, would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" We sat across from each other in a room that smelled faintly of mildew and lemon pledge. She opened the file and turned it toward me. "This is what you're asking about, I assume." I stared at a printed map. Sure enough, my parcel was marked in a pale blue overlay, labeled Everidge Peaks Community Regulation Zone. According to the timestamp, it had been filed just 6 days ago, 3 days before I returned from my trip. There were signatures, one from the HOA president, another from a county official I didn't recognize, and then, at the bottom, a name I did, Edward C. Mallory, former zoning clerk, retired 2 weeks ago. "Where's the notification of boundary change?" I asked. Tina flipped through the file, frowned. "There should have been certified mail sent to any affected title holders." "I didn't get a damn thing," I said. "No letter, no email, no flag in the system. You're telling me someone redrew jurisdiction lines around my land and forgot to let the guy who owns it know?" Tina winced. "It happens, not often. But in rural parcels, especially ones bordering community developments, sometimes requests get pushed through with minimal review." "Minimal review?" I leaned forward. "That land's been private since 1928. I've got a notarized title from 2012. It's surveyed, staked, and filed." She gave a slow nod. "That's true. Your records are in good order, but the new filing claims your parcel was always part of an older natural stewardship overlay that was reclassified as part of the HOA's regulatory district. That overlay is based on an archived zoning plan from the 1980s. "Bullshit," I said, loud enough to make her blink. "There is no natural stewardship overlay on my property. It's raw deeded land. You're telling me this HOA came in here, filed an overlay, forged a zoning claim, and now thinks they can evict me from my own farm?" Tina hesitated. She was a bureaucrat, not a judge, but she didn't look shocked. She looked tired. "I can request an internal review," she offered. "But you should know that once a zoning adjustment is processed, reversing it requires a hearing, and in the meantime, the map stands." "The map stands," I repeated, "even if it's fake." "I can't say whether it is or not," she replied carefully. "But you're not the first property owner to raise concerns about Everidge Peaks HOA." I sat back and exhaled. Great. Before I left, I asked for copies of the map, the filing forms, the signatures, and the original parcel history. Tina printed everything and handed it over. I noticed something strange right away. One of the documents used a signature block from Edward Mallory, but the font on the name line was mismatched, crooked, like someone had pasted it in. The digital copy was missing standard metadata tags too. It smelled off. Outside, I sat in my truck and took out my phone. I still had no service. That in itself was unusual in town, but not impossible in these hills. Still, it felt like too many things were lining up too quickly. I drove over to the library, used their free Wi-Fi to pull property records from the state database. The official state plat map didn't yet show the HOA overlay. Interesting. I dug deeper, downloading the parcel boundaries from a GIS tool I used during my old FEMA days. Nothing about a regulatory overlay. Nothing about stewardship zones. My property was still listed as independent rural agricultural, free from any residential covenant or planned community regulation. That was all the confirmation I needed. By the time I headed back up the mountain, it was nearly sundown. When I reached the first bend in the forest road, I slammed the brakes. A new sign had been drilled into a tree trunk at the access point. "Welcome to Everidge Peaks Community Corridor. No passage without authorization." Underneath it, a metal post had been planted in the ground. Fresh concrete, fresh paint, fresh nerve. I stepped out, tore the sign off the tree with one good yank, tossed it into the back of the truck, and kept driving. The mountain was mine. and someone was about to learn what happens when they try to steal it. The next morning, I woke up to silence that didn't feel quite right. Normally, the hum of the satellite receiver, the soft tick of the inverter, or even the scratchy AM band I kept on in the kitchen gave the house a pulse. But today, nothing. I checked the breaker panel, then the inverter. Power was fine, but no internet, no phone. My satellite signal was showing zero connectivity, not low, not lagging, just dead. I rebooted the receiver twice, ran diagnostics, still dead. Then I noticed the blinking light on the emergency link box I'd set up years ago. It was hardwired through a private provider, completely separate from the HOA's local grid. The light blinked service disrupted. That's when my stomach twisted. I checked the antenna mount behind the house. The pole was intact, but the dish was tilted, like it had been wrenched by hand. Someone had physically tampered with it. I made a note to call the provider from town. In the meantime, I needed supplies anyway, so I loaded up the truck and headed for the road. That's when I saw the slab. At the first fork beyond my fence line, just outside the tree line, a huge precast concrete block had been dropped across the road. It had rebar loops on top, likely lowered in by crane or heavy equipment. Spray painted across the face in fluorescent orange were the words, "Temporary closure, HO infrastructure maintenance, no public access." Public access. My ass. I got out and examined the slab. No markings from the county. No permit number, no signage from the Department of Transportation. This wasn't an official road closure, it was a goddamn blockade. Behind it, I saw faint tire tracks. Someone had been up here with equipment recently. That meant they had access through the secondary logging trail, the one that wrapped around the back end of my property through federal forest. It wasn't even marked on most maps. I had no intention of letting this stand. I hiked back up to the house, changed into boots, grabbed my emergency pack, and headed out on foot, cutting through the woods using a trail I'd flagged years ago with survey tape. It took me about an hour to reach the lower valley where my old boundary gate used to be. When I stepped into the clearing, I saw it immediately. They'd installed a motion-triggered camera on a pole with a small solar panel and a laminated HOA placard zip-tied to the post. Just beyond it, parked half-hidden behind the tree line, was a white truck with a light bar. Not a police cruiser, but one of those private security vehicles people love to rent when they're too cheap to hire real law enforcement. As I stepped closer, two men emerged from behind the truck, both wearing dark polo shirts and tactical vests marked HOA Community Patrol. One of them carried a clipboard. The other had a holstered sidearm. The clipboard guy stepped forward. "Sir, this area is temporarily closed to foot traffic under HOA Perimeter Security Code. Do you have authorized credentials?" I stared. "You're standing on private property. Mine. Do you have credentials?" He didn't flinch. "We received reports of unauthorized movement through the sector. Under our jurisdiction, any unregistered entry can be logged as a security incident." The other guy stepped in, one hand resting on the butt of his weapon. "You need to turn around, sir. Now." I locked eyes with him. "Or what? You'll detain me for walking on my own land." Neither answered. Clipboard man raised a phone and started taking photos of me. I smiled wide and flipped him off for the record. I turned and walked back the way I came, pulse steady but seething. Once I was out of range, I activated the trail cam system I'd installed years ago to track wildlife migration. I'd forgotten I even had those little bastards wired into the trees above the slope. If anyone came through that secondary trail again, I'd have their faces, plates, and time-stamped footage. By the time I returned home, something else had changed. A thick yellow envelope was taped to my door. I tore it off and opened it on the porch. Inside was a letter marked Notice of Provisional Foreclosure Due to Non-Compliance. It listed my violations, including failure to register property under HOA jurisdiction, refusal to submit site for inspection, unauthorized water usage from protected aquifer, refusal to vacate upon notice. Then came the kicker. As a result of non-compliance, access to all HOA-supported services is suspended. A review of property rights is scheduled, and the title may be subject to reassignment per Subdivision Charter 11.2. That wasn't just arrogance anymore. That was a threat. An implied seizure of land rights through fabricated procedure. I stormed inside, grabbed the last working piece of tech I had left, a dedicated field tablet with GPS and offline mapping tools, and started pulling together every document I had. My original deed, satellite photos, survey stakes, assigned water rights transfer from 1983. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the old drone. Still charged, still operational. I programmed a flight path over the logging trail and launched it from the ridge behind the house. The feed came back clean until it hit the far edge of my property. There, tucked under a canopy of pine, were 3 ATVs and a stack of fertilizer bags parked on my land. I zoomed in. 2 of the men from earlier were loading something onto a trailer. One of them pointed up at the drone and said something. The feed cut out. I brought the drone back, heart pounding, and stored the footage. I didn't know what they were doing back there, but whatever it was, it sure as hell wasn't sanctioned by any legal authority. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept watch by the window, one hand on a flashlight, the other near a loaded shotgun. The mountain was still, but it wasn't quiet, and this time I knew they weren't going to stop. The birdhouse looked like any other, handcrafted cedar nailed to a pine just off the main garden path. I'd built it myself years ago and hadn't paid it any mind since. But something about the way it caught the light that morning made me stop. The hole wasn't round anymore, it was square. Slightly too perfect. Closer inspection confirmed it. A pinhole lens embedded in the carved opening, clean and black like a pupil staring back at me. I pried the birdhouse down and took it apart at my workbench. Inside was a small lithium battery, a micro SD slot, and a blinking signal LED still warm. Whoever put it there hadn't just been watching, they'd been streaming. Likely real time. Likely to the HOA. That meant they'd been in my yard. Close. Quiet. Watching. I wrapped the components in a lead line pouch and stuck it in the gun safe. I was done playing defense. By mid-morning, I had the drone up again, this time flying a slow survey grid across the back ridge. That's when I caught them red-handed. 2 trucks, one black, one tan, pulled off the access road behind the tree line. The black one bore the same HOA insignia I'd seen on the SUVs that came to my gate. 3 men got out. They started unloading sacks from the truck bed, bright green with white hazard stripes, ammonium nitrate fertilizer, enough to seed a mountain's worth of grass or trigger a visit from the DEA, depending on the mix. They weren't headed for the HOA's land. They were walking straight across the boundary line, onto mine. I recorded everything. Drone angle, timestamps, facial profiles, license plates. One of the men, older, bearded, wearing an HOA windbreaker, pulled out his phone and snapped photos of my field irrigation system. Then he stepped behind my barn and out of sight. That was enough for me. I grabbed the full dossier of documents I'd been compiling. Original deed, survey photos, signed water rights certificate, timestamps from the drone, metadata files, and drove straight to the sheriff's office in town. I knew the sheriff, Roy Duncan, from back in the day. He was one of the few county officials who hadn't yet been seduced or cowed by the HOA's lobby pressure. I didn't bother with reception. I walked right into his office and dropped the folder on his desk. "Roy, I need you to look at this before someone gets hurt." He studied the first few pages in silence, then the photos. He let out a long whistle at the fertilizer shots. "That's your land?" he asked. "Every square inch. The bastards came in from the North Ridge, off the old Federal Service Road. Same spot they dropped the concrete block last week." Roy leaned back, chewing his pen. "I've heard rumblings about Everidge Peaks playing fast and loose with boundaries. But this?" He flipped to the image of the fake birdhouse camera. "This is criminal trespass and unlawful surveillance." "And if I hadn't found it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He picked up the phone and dialed someone. "Hey, Davis, get me Deputy Hill and pull the incident map from Sector 14. Also, flag the name Karen Lawrence. We're opening an inquiry." I sat there for the next 20 minutes as Roy built out a case file and took a formal statement. He scanned the drone footage into evidence and tagged the license plates with a rush request for ownership lookup. By the time I left, he'd already issued a notice to preserve evidence to the Everidge Peaks HOA, meaning if they deleted one email, they'd be looking at obstruction charges. It felt good, like the tide was finally shifting, but I didn't get far. Halfway up the mountain road, my truck's GPS lit up with a strange message. "Route updated. Proceed to main HOA checkpoint for access clearance." The hell I would. I pulled over, popped the hood, and yanked the power from the GPS module. Somewhere between my last service visit and today, someone had either pushed a firmware update or installed something new. I made a mental note to rip every wire in the truck down to the frame if I had to. Back at the house, I found another envelope nailed to my front gate. This one was thicker, no return address. Inside was a professionally printed letterhead from something called the Everidge Peaks Legal and Mediation Department. It read, Mr. Emerson, our client, Everidge Peaks HOA, has authorized a final non-adversarial offer. If you agree to lease your land to the HOA for regulatory development through Q4 of this fiscal year, we will rescind all pending foreclosure actions and offer limited restoration of access services, water, internet, transit. Failure to agree by end of business tomorrow will be taken as formal rejection and trigger full legal escalation, including fines, title suspension, and contested claim filing with the Regional Planning Authority. Please contact our representative, Atayan R. Ainsley, Esk. I read it twice, 3 times. Then I did what I always do when something smells like bullshit. I verified. I called the Colorado State Bar Association and asked for the license details of 1R, Ainsley, SQ. They put me on hold. When they came back, the answer wasn't a surprise. No such person, no such license, no such firm. It was a phantom threat, signed by a ghost. They were faking legal pressure now, not even hiding it, just slapping fake lawyers on fake documents and hoping I'd cave. But they didn't know me. I wasn't a suburban accountant or some absentee cabin owner with a nervous disposition. I'd spent 15 years dealing with disaster zones and broken systems. I knew what a real threat looked like. And this was theater. Loud, messy, and about to collapse under its own weight. I took out a fresh SD card and loaded every last shred of digital evidence onto it, then drove it straight to the county legal office and filed a motion for protective injunction. It wouldn't stop them yet, but it would get the attention of people higher up the chain. And I was only getting started. I woke up to silence. No wind, no birds, not even the usual distant hum of trucks on the Ridgeline Road. Just thick, oppressive quiet. It wasn't natural, the kind of silence that sinks into your chest like a warning. I opened the front door and stepped out barefoot onto the porch. That's when I saw the tire tracks, deep, fresh, leading from the access road straight up to my barn. They hadn't even bothered to cover them. Whoever it was had come through in the dead of night. I moved fast, scanning the perimeter. Nothing broken, nothing missing. But the padlock on my equipment shed had been cut and replaced with a brand new one. Shiny, untouched, not mine. I took out the bolt cutters and popped it open. Inside, all of my seed reserves, over 30 sacks of heritage barley, were gone. In their place, stacked neatly on the floor, were rows of identical white barrels marked with the HOA logo and a barcode I didn't recognize. I didn't touch them, just stood there, letting the anger simmer into something colder. This wasn't sabotage. It was a setup, a planted cache of God knows what, probably waiting to be discovered by one of their fake inspectors, followed by some county official who'd regretfully shut me down for unauthorized materials. I photographed everything, down to the barcode serials. Then I closed the door, relocked it with my own hardware, and nailed a warning sign across it. Private property. Unauthorized entry will be prosecuted. Camera footage recorded. I didn't lie about that last part. I had hidden cams along the tree line now. Motion triggered, infrared, feeding into a satellite backup drive. One of them caught movement around 3 in the morning. A dark SUV, 2 masked men, bolt cutters. One of them had a distinctive limp. The other had a tattoo on the back of his neck, 3 vertical bars. I didn't recognize them, but I knew where to find out. Back in town, I met with Deputy Hill from Roy's office. He pulled up the footage and frowned. They're using contractor gear. See the gloves, the gait, even the way they hold the tools. Ex-military, probably private security, not HOA members, not officially. Rent-a-goons, I asked. Looks that way. He pulled up an incident log from another case. There's been 3 reports in the last 2 months of similar ghost inspections. Barrels left on land, break-ins, missing supplies, all tied to areas near the Everidge Peak Zone. Nothing concrete. Until now. I handed over my SD card. That footage stays offline until we have legal protection. He nodded. We'll register it with the DA. You'll want to press charges? Eventually, but first I need to cut off their air supply, which meant going to the source. I drove out to the county zoning office, a gray slab of bureaucracy tucked between a chain pharmacy and a strip mall gym. I asked for the file on all pending boundary revisions related to Everidge Peaks. The clerk raised an eyebrow, muttered something about confidential annexation plans, and told me the records were sealed under emergency development protections. I pushed. I showed my deed, my federal water rights, the camera footage, just enough to rattle him. Finally, he sighed and slid me a printed copy under the glass. "I shouldn't be showing you this," he said, "but someone needs to blow the whistle." The document was a scanned PDF, dated 2 weeks earlier. It included a boundary adjustment map that swallowed my land entirely, forest, lake, even my driveway, stamped and signed by a county official I'd never heard of, Ronald Beeks, regional land supervisor, except Ronald Beeks, as I'd later discover, had retired in March. The signature had been copied from a template and pasted onto the digital file. Sloppy. I asked the clerk where it had come from. He told me the file had been submitted by a registered land consultant named Heather Linwood, working on behalf of Everidge Peaks HOA. That name I knew. Linwood had shown up in a lawsuit 2 years ago, accused of falsifying wetlands designations to reroute construction permits. She'd walked, no charges. Now she was back, and she was targeting my mountain. I left the office with a hard copy of the fake document and drove straight to the county registrar's office to file a formal property dispute. That gave me some leverage, at least on paper, but I knew it wouldn't stop them from trying something dirtier in the meantime. And I was right. By the time I got back to the ranch, my power was out. The solar batteries were fine. No storms. The backup inverters showed no faults. Someone had manually shut off the breaker panel behind the pump house, the panel that sat under lock and key. The key was missing. I went to my front gate to check the trail cam. Gone. Ripped from the post. Not just removed. Smashed. I stood there for a long time in the fading light, looking out across the tree line. They weren't just bluffing anymore. They were inside. The morning after the blackout, I started laying traps. Not the kind with teeth or wires. Those were illegal without proper signage, but legal ones. Paperwork. Surveillance. Dead man switches. If they wanted a war of attrition, fine. But I was done playing defense. First, I moved the drone into a fixed pattern sweep over the property, set to patrol every hour, feeding live to my encrypted drive. I rerouted the solar array outputs to an isolated circuit, cutting them off from the breaker they'd tampered with. I drilled out the tampered locks and replaced them with industrial magnetic locks that couldn't be jimmied. I also started archiving every single call, email, and correspondence from anyone mentioning Everidge Peaks, HOA authority, land assessments, or emergency compliance protocols. By 10 a.m., I had 3 calls from unknown numbers. All 3 left messages. The last one wasn't even pretending anymore. "This is the HOA Compliance Division," the voice said, flat and digitized. "You have failed to adhere to emergency integration requirements. This is your final notification. Officers will arrive to collect your keys and initiate property transfer by 1400 hours. Voluntary compliance is advised." I replayed that message twice, then forwarded it to Deputy Hill, along with a copy of the fake boundary document and the fake legal notice. I told him I expected a criminal investigation by the end of the day. He didn't argue. By noon, I heard them again. Engines, multiple. I looked out the window and counted them. 3 black SUVs creeping up the access road, slow, deliberate, like a motorcade of vultures. No markings this time. No HOA decals. No visible plates. But they were the same type of vehicle Karen had arrived in just 2 weeks earlier. They didn't stop at the gate. They drove right through it. I mean that literally. One of the SUVs just nudged the metal bar aside with a steel-plated grill and kept going. The gate buckled inward, tore off the hinge, and crumpled into the gravel. I stood on my porch with my arms crossed, not saying a word. The lead SUV stopped 10 feet from my boots. A man in a gray suit stepped out. No clipboard, no badge, just a binder and sunglasses too dark for the weather. "Mr. Emerson," he said, "you've been advised repeatedly. This is now a final enforcement visit. By authority of the Everidge Peaks HOA and emergency municipal compliance regulations, we are authorized to reclaim this property pending arbitration." "You have no legal basis," I said. "You're trespassing." He didn't blink. "You'll want to take this seriously." He opened the binder and showed me a new document. This one was thick, at least 30 pages. It claimed to be a lease to HOA transfer agreement, citing Emergency Municipal Code 241B and referencing a federal floodplain realignment act. which was strange considering we were 4,000 feet above sea level and hadn't seen a flood here since 1968. I asked him if he was a lawyer. "I represent the compliance team," he said. I asked for a badge number. He flipped a page, showed me a license. It was laminated, not state issued, no bar number, so I took out my phone and snapped a picture. He lunged for it. I stepped back and whistled 3 sharp notes. The dog I'd rescued 2 years ago from a mudslide in Boulder shot out from the barn like a missile and landed between us with a snarl that could rattle ribs. The man froze. My dog didn't. He crept forward, low, hackles up, until the man took 2 steps back and raised his hands. That's when I saw it. Inside his binder was a concealed body mic. Not just a recorder, a live feed transceiver. They were filming this. For court, or worse, for HOA internal theatrics. A staged voluntary transfer confrontation. "Leave," I said, calm and firm. "Now." He didn't argue, just gave me a long look, got back in his car, and all 3 SUVs reversed down the slope. That afternoon, I drove straight to the sheriff's office and filed a trespassing and destruction of property report. Deputy Hill was there, and when I showed him the footage from the dog standoff, his eyebrows climbed halfway up his forehead. "You got any idea who this guy is?" "Not yet, but I know who might." Which is how I ended up in a diner booth across from my cousin Laura, a GIS analyst for the state who owed me one after I fixed her cabin's collapsed roof 2 years ago. Laura pulled up the HOA's land filings from the past 6 months. Turns out Everidge Peaks had submitted 13 expansion requests under different shell organizations, some of them listed as eco-conservation coalitions, others as veterans housing initiatives. They were laundering their land grabs under nonprofit fronts. And guess who signed off on most of those permits? A woman named Heather Linwood. "She's bad news," Laura said. "She's got a consulting license, but no official land survey credentials. She's been gaming rural zoning boards for years." I asked her for one more favor. "Can you get me satellite archive imagery of the property over the last 20 years? Anything that proves this farm was never part of the development zone." Laura nodded. "Give me a day." Back at the ranch, I replaced the gate with a steel crossbeam welded to the fence posts. No hinges this time. If they wanted in, they'd need a chainsaw. And I was done being polite. I started drafting a complaint to the Bureau of Land Management and the Department of Justice, not just for myself, but for anyone else up here who might have been targeted the same way. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was a system, and someone needed to burn it down. The next 48 hours were a blur of coordination, paranoia, and preparing for whatever the HOA had planned next. I barely slept. Every sound outside triggered a response. I was checking cameras, motion sensors, even the livestock's behavior. If they sent another convoy, I wanted to catch them on tape from every angle. But instead of brute force, they changed tactics again. Early morning, a white unmarked van pulled up just beyond the tree line where the private road forks with the county-maintained trail. They didn't come near the gate, just parked, sat there, hours. No movement, no driver change, no deliveries. I watched it through binoculars and spotted a glint off a lens behind the passenger glass. Surveillance. Not even subtle anymore. I phoned Laura. She'd delivered. A full satellite time-lapse of my land's topography going back to 2003. Clear as day. My property was isolated, undeveloped, fully fenced, and never once connected to the HOA development grid. No roads, no pipes, no common utilities. I could overlay the HOA's fraudulent boundary map onto the satellite images, and their version looked like a child had colored outside the lines. But the real gem came from another file she dug up, a registered land inheritance certificate from my uncle's will, sealed by the County Land Commission in 2009. Not just a private title, but one with an explicit exemption clause from municipal development due to its designation as a restoration reserve property. That exemption meant even if the HOA could expand their reach, my land was legally immune unless I personally consented. I printed it, blew it up, made copies, and mailed one certified copy straight to the HOA office, addressed to Karen, with a note stapled on top. Nice try. Then I went to the sheriff's department again, this time with everything. Satellite overlays, the will, the footage of their compliance officer trying to take my phone, and the body mic. Deputy Hill leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple like he had a migraine forming. Jesus, Co, this is deep. Real deep. You're not the only one, are you? I bet my water rights I'm not. He promised to forward it all to the district attorney. That afternoon, I heard from the lawyer again. This time, a different number, different voice, but same message. This is legal counsel for Everidge Peaks Community Management. We acknowledge receipt of your documents, but due to active litigation under the Federal Community Realignment Program, your exemption may be nullified under Section 12, Subheading C. We are prepared to negotiate a settlement to avoid further disruption. Please respond within 24 hours. I paused. Federal Community Realignment Program. That didn't exist, at least not in any federal register I'd ever heard of. I asked him for his legal name and license number. He gave a name, Daniel Humes. I ran it through the state bar directory. No such person. I searched the number. It bounced through 2 rerouting proxies in Nevada and ended in a disconnected line. These weren't lawyers. They were actors. At this point, I had enough to file a formal fraud complaint with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies and a federal land use violation report with the Bureau of Land Management. I did both. I attached everything. Then I started making noise. I called an old friend, Jake Stanford, investigative reporter with a small but ferocious environmental watchdog blog. Jake owed me for a lead I gave him 5 years ago that got a crooked mining firm shut down. When I told him what was happening, he swore and said, "You've got to be kidding me. This is coordinated land laundering." He wanted boots on the ground. I told him to come with a camera, a press badge, and wear steel-toed boots. Jake arrived the next morning. We spent hours walking the perimeter, filming the drone footage, photographing the busted gate, and laying out documents across the dining table. He interviewed me on record. Then he pointed to the birdhouse on the edge of the property. "What's that red light?" I froze. We hadn't touched the birdhouse since the last footage. I climbed the ladder and opened the hatch. Inside, wedged behind a faux panel, was not just a camera, but a solar-powered transmitter, still active, live broadcasting, not motion-triggered. It had been feeding footage somewhere in real time. We disabled it and bagged it for evidence. I called Deputy Hill and told him we had a warrant-worthy device on private land. Jake uploaded a teaser article within 12 hours. The headline, "When HOA Turns Hostile, the War for Rural Land in Colorado." Within the hour, Karen called me personally, not through a lawyer, not through a proxy. Her voice came through cracked and furious. "You think this is going to end well for you? You're destroying a community effort." I cut her off. "I'm going to destroy your whole operation." And hung up. By that evening, I had 4 more media inquiries, a sheriff's appointment for evidence pickup, and an alert from Laura that something big was coming down the pipe. A federal audit had been initiated against Everidge Peaks HOA. It was only the beginning. 2 black SUVs pulled into Everidge Peaks that Friday morning, unmarked but government plates. I watched the live stream Jake had set up across from the HOA office as federal agents stepped out, clipboard in hand, warrants in tow. Within 20 minutes, the building was cordoned off with yellow tape. Employees were escorted out, laptops boxed, hard drives seized. Karen wasn't on site. She'd gone silent after our last call. Deputy Hill called to confirm she was under investigation for filing forged documents to the Federal Land Registry, including a lost deed fabricated using outdated county templates. I wasn't the only victim. At least 6 other properties showed signs of tampering, all linked to the same digital signature. A week later, I testified. In court, I laid out everything. Maps, footage, emails, the fake lawyer, the transmitter in the birdhouse. Karen sat stone-faced, flanked by 2 attorneys. When the judge read the verdict, her jaw clenched. Guilty on multiple counts, fraud, unlawful surveillance, and attempted illegal annexation. Sentence, 12 years, no parole. The HOA was dissolved. Properties returned to rightful owners. My land, officially sealed off as a private agricultural reserve, immune to further HOA claims. I installed new gates, cameras, and a sign that read, HOA Free Zone. Trespassers will be legally processed. Then I hosted a barbecue for the veterans and farmers in the region. One guy brought moonshine, Jake brought the press, and me. I finally got to sleep, knowing the mountain was mine again.